Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello, our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Stephen Oliver, the composer, the Reverend Roger Royle, parson and entertainer, and Laurie Taylor, professor of sociology at York University. We have music from Gary Howard. Now, wasn't it nice the way the Spanish king was just that bit late turning up to talk to Parliament? Some people wondered if he was being Spanish about it, but I think he just didn't want to be officious. Awful to catch them without the mace. Give them a couple of minutes to think where they'd last put it. And the Lord Chancellor, sliding off the woolsack, wouldn't want to rush it if the thing's as lumpy as everyone says it is. No, the king, he didn't want to catch anyone out. People who turn up too promptly are a real pain. They're treading on your heels. And who likes that? You've got to give people some idea when they're expected, but the last thing any host wants is their guests to report to them. Punctuality turns everyone into toy soldiers. Anyway, that's what I think.
As somebody who's pathologically punctual myself, I loathe all these balmy conventions.
Yes.
But I do at the same time know that to be on the dot suggests over-eagerness, a life that is not sufficiently full and busy. And I was conscious of being horribly miffed the other evening when, for fascinating and excellent and valid reasons, we were actually 40 minutes late for a dinner party and thought, right, for once we won't be first. And 5 minutes after our bums hit the sofa, the second couple arrived, gasping and saying cheerily, oh, gosh, sorry, panic as usual. Sorry, have you all been waiting ages? I could cheerfully have mugged them with a cut glass
decanter. But why were you 40 minutes late? 40 minutes is late. Of course, you were invited for 8 o'clock. The correct time to arrive is 20 minutes past, or possibly 22 minutes past.
Yes,
but
I know.
By 8:30 you're late, and by 20 to 9 you're certainly late.
You don't want to hear why we were 40 minutes late, Bob, so I will allow you to move on to somebody else.
It was more or less a rhetorical question to make the point.
Yes.
The other thing about getting the timing right to arrive is that you want to arrive when there are enough people there to notice your arrival, and not so many people that they're all enjoying themselves and don't notice your arrival. So it is the exquisite moment.
Oh, exquisite indeed, but sooner or later someone will address why there's any ambiguity at all, but I wait for that moment with some anticipation.
I thoroughly dislike the whole idea of turning up late for
anything.
He's
in one of those moods.
I don't understand.
How could that be?
I don't understand at all why it has to be that people turn up late. To me, as an expression of politeness, turning up late seems to be analogous to hitting your hostess over the head with a small but perfectly formed sandbag. I can see no merit in it at all. But I think I see why people do it, why people turn up late, and it's resentment. No one really likes being obliged to people, and when someone invites you out to dinner or to a party, they are putting you under an obligation. And I wonder whether it isn't just a perfectly ordinary idea of resentment being presented. I will certainly come, but you've no right to command my time as to when I shall come. The only time it's appropriate to be late is, as everyone knows, for a dress rehearsal. Even Bertie Wooster knows this. A dress rehearsal in the theatre, he was instructed to appear at 7:30 for one, and turned up at 10 so as not to be too early. And clearly that's absolutely right.
But being late is only a sort of theory. If you're asked for 8 o'clock for dinner, you are not late at 8:20.
Why aren't you?
You are late. If you've been invited at 8 o'clock, you get there at 8 o'clock.
You'll never be invited again if you do.
Yes, you will. If you will be invited by me, because I plan my meals and they're timed, and the whole conversation is planned, and it's a great mind-boggling sensation that people are going to enjoy from the word go. And the curtain goes up at 8, and I hope they're gone by 11.
He's got his red coat on by 8.
There's happiness the whole way.
Anything more disagreeable, I cannot imagine.
Well, Stephen, you talk as though you get so many invitations to turn down. There are a lot of people who don't get invitations, even whether they've got wedding garments or not.
But
the vicar's in his vein.
There is only one type of invitation that is really good, and that's the children's party invitation, which says from 4 till 6. Yes. You arrive at 4, you go at 6, you've got a balloon.
I must question you a little narrowly on this, Roger. When you say 8 8 o'clock, surely you do not expect people to appear on the dot. Surely that leeway between 8 and, shall we say, 20 past is there for both parties to the transaction to know that that they're not in the blinking army after all.
No, they're not in the blinking army, but they're very welcome from 8 o'clock onwards, and it's very nice if they arrive on the dot, the whole thing goes well. If I'm hanging about and I've got my microwave timed, it's all up the shoe.
I suppose it must carry over from services themselves. I mean, they don't say, like, 8 o'clock mass and you arrive at 20 past, really, do you? And I certainly enjoyed many of Roger's parties myself, although I found the pews have inhibited the dancing somewhat. But anyway,
I'll have them moved.
I think it's something also to do with social class, because when you talk about the king arriving late, we know that for the theatre, really, that there is a very strict law that the people who arrive the latest are the people enjoying the highest status. I mean, those people who are queuing up for the gods are queuing up for an hour and a quarter before. So there is a notion that by being able to hold yourself back, then you are mimicking royalty who arrive in their box, and at that moment the thing can start.
Well, I don't. Yes, I don't think the king. I'm sure the king wasn't really doing that. Yes. I understand fully the 8 o'clock. I mean, but the thing is, like our language, which is uninflected, and therefore that's one sign of its true sophistication. There are no principles, no rules. The fact that you do, or you should, I don't know what circles you move in, Roger, but you should turn up at 20 past 8 for dinner, does not mean that you must not turn up prompt at 1 o'clock for lunch. I mean, it's just like the language. There is a principle, I suppose, why R-O-U-G-H is pronounced rough, but don't apply it to the word though or anything like that. You have to take everything on its merits. It's just 7 times out of 10. 7 times out of 10, my friends, come to the penitent stool and listen to me. 7 times out of 10, an invitation which says you've got to wear evening dress. It'll be okay if you wear a dinner jacket. Oh, but on 3 occasions it won't be okay at all. And it's sorting out those 3 occasions that makes the men separate from the boys.
But can I propose that there is a way around all this? You see, I absolutely agree with Roger. I like punctuality, and in fact, all this stuff about people snapping at the host's heels, most of the hosts I know actually bust a gut to be ready by 8. Now, they may like that 20 minutes to be prowling among the peanuts and hoping they don't get too tired before the others arrive, but I rather doubt it. But you see, the ideal arrangement is, say, for a wedding. Now, we're talking about church services, what Roger was saying. We all know that the red meat of the occasion will be dished up at 2 p.m. at All Saints or whatever. And it's up to the people who are coming to choose their own timescale. Some will get their 20 minutes advance and sit admiring the hats. Others will just about precede the bride up the path. Everybody suits themselves. To this end, I think it would be good if we all had a sort of antechamber or green room in our houses where people foregathered, to listen to a little Mozart and sip a dry sherry, and at 10 past 8 the hostess would open the door and say, come along, chaps.
That green room is the street outside Michael O'Donnell. When we were frequenting a public house not 1,000 miles from here the other day, he said the thing is, anyone who arrives early or on time is in duty bound to drive around the road. But the only thing was, the other time he was giving a party, he forgot the tonic, had to go out, and he met several pairs of them all prowling, in Weybridge it was, and he just beckoned them with his arm, and led them to his own front door as though it was through the jungle in Weybridge and he was some kind of old mountain man. So you have to beware of running into the guests before the curtain really is up.
But you also have to know, which we haven't talked about, that if you get the time right for arriving, the time right for leaving is also critical, and that hasn't been mentioned, because so many people who might be experts at knowing whether to arrive 8, 10, 12 or 15 minutes after the appointed time will be the very, very same people who are simply unable, in Robert Benchley's immortal phrase, to know when to say, well, I'll be toddling along. It's a very, very difficult thing to know, and indeed Robert Benchley presumed that he'd got it completely wrong when he noticed on several occasions when he'd been to parties that a person had come up to him and said, well, I'll be toddling along, and it turned out to be the host going to bed.
Even worse than that was Ogden Nash. He sort of categorises that sort of person as being the one who says, well, after it's time for everyone to go home, let's go in the kitchen and make scrambled eggs. I've never actually said it, where I'm turning to another topic, but I've often felt like saying it when someone round these tables opens his mouth. I've never quite done it, held up my finger and said, patience, or something like that. But it's not a nice word at all, and I'm only saying this because Laurie's been very patient because he wants to launch himself into this topic.
Well, yes, it was prompted by something that I knew was going to be rather a long evening at the Coliseum last Saturday, and a long evening I knew it was going to be, so I wasn't too surprised when after the curtain went up, when Germinance took the best part of 10 minutes to wake the sleeping squires, or spent what seemed like the best part of 40 minutes telling the relatively short story of how Klingsaw managed to wrestle the all-holiest spear from Amfortas. Fair dues, after all. Even one of the experts in the official guide to the 5 hours of Wagner's Parsifal admitted the first part was on the slowish side. But it did require a lot of this stuff called patience. I could actually feel myself exercising it, like a pile driver, flattening out the little psychic flutters of unrest, the desire to cross and uncross legs, to look around, push my knee into the seat in front, read my programme. At least, though, I could free associate. Wonder if somehow I was naturally less patient than others in the audience, less practised at it, perhaps. Was it possible to become more patient? And why was patience itself thought to be a mark of saintliness? Because unlike faith or charity, it seemed to lack any positive aspect. I mean, if you are patient, do you do anything else but control your impatience? In fact, I was just trying to remember who it was who once so appositely referred to patience as a minor form of despair, and not a virtue at all, when this damn great stuffed swan dropped from the flies onto the centre stage, and on rushed Parsifal with his bow and arrow, and suddenly everything started happening.
Listen, well, but patience, you said all that needs to be said, in my opinion, but you haven't yet you left out childhood. Patience or impatience is the absolute condition of childhood. I mean, when an hour was the length of a day and a day was the length of a year, that kind of thing, it's absolutely impossible for a child to wait for anything, not to have something there and then. I want it now. It is absolutely unbearable. But and then the parent says have patience, but that's only really saying instant gratification isn't always possible. And I would say that have patience, when it's said by a grown up to a child, is only marginally more tolerant of the childish condition than shut up. But only just, very thin line dividing it.
I don't think that's true at all. I think the exercise of patience is one of the things that is wonderful when you... the Wagner's Parsifal is a very good case in point.
I thought that'd get under your skin.
If you go to Parsifal expecting it to be Offenbach, you will become impatient with it, because it doesn't work like that. It works by your stopping your sense of impatience, by suffering it, by being patient. That's how it works. Gradually, it grows around you.
You're making it out, you see, that patience is a virtue. It isn't.
Well, That's what I'm saying.
No one ever goes round.
The opposite of patience is not impatience.
Yes, it is.
The opposite of patience is anger.
Nobody goes round saying, unselfishness is a virtue. No one goes around saying, kindness is a virtue. You might just as well say, ice skating is a virtue, as say patience is a virtue. It is, as Laurie correctly said, it's simply masking your impatience.
No, not at all. There are times when you need to be impatient. If things are if there's injustice, then you need to be impatient about that. But patience is one of the fruits of the spirit. It is a most marvellous thing, because we don't have it as natural beings. It is something that we have to work for. Now, if I was to go to Wagner, I'd have to be patient, because as St. Paul says, patience comes out of suffering. And for me to go to Wagner would be sheer suffering. But he also says that patience produces character, and character produces hope. And therefore, it's one of these qualities within man or woman that shows that they can take a balanced reaction.
Well, I wonder I'm trying to remember who said St. Paul says, and I partly agree with him.
I only partly agree.
Yeah, well, I only partly agree with what you said, but it's your turn now, Laurie.
When you talk about, just take another context rather, let's get away from Parsifal for a moment. If you're talking about...
Yes, for
if
quite a few moments.
If we are talking about the patience displayed by people standing in a post office queue. Now, in these circumstances, there is no ennoblement of the spirit about to arrive. I mean, the fact that when you arrive at the counter, it's not like the last act of Parsifal, nothing transcendental is going to occur. Now, is one therefore displaying patience by standing mutely and quietly in that queue?
Yes.
Or is one therefore, is that a real thing, an absolute? I mean, you can talk about having.
The thing, Laurie, is that patience is a useful skill, not a virtue, in a situation which you are powerless to change.
Yeah.
And this is summed up for me by all... Situations arrive in travelling, in which patience is not just desirable, but essential. Think of a crowded airport. 3 flights have been delayed. I can see now in my mind's eye 2 Americans in sort of shorts and bare feet at Addis Ababa being held up by the crush of people around them, standing there tranquilly reading their books, while I was sweating with panic and anxiety and one of them just turned to me and said, settle down, lady, settle down, there's nothing you can do. And you see them in traffic jams, bringing nervous breakdown closer. But I would have thought, now that we know all that we do about repression and sublimation and stress-related illnesses, I would say there's a very good medical case to be made against exercising too much patience. But the opposite of patience is not necessarily impatience with all its connotations of bluster and childishness and intolerance. It's simply a normal, positive reaction to the events and people that you come across.
You can express your impatience in private. In public, if you're a grown-up, you have entered a kind of implicit compact with all the others not to hoot your blinking horn and not to overtake on the inside. And people who do that get up everyone's noses because they're revealing the same infantile streak and feeling that is in all of us, but which most of us have elected to do our best to suppress. You don't get heart attacks. There's nothing to stop you screaming in the privacy of your own lovely car, by the way. Oh, yes, when no one can hear.
But that's not true, because I think patience is being able to sum up a situation and react to it properly. It isn't just sort of screaming away or sublimating anything. You've seen what the situation is, you've weighed it up, and you've realised that you're going to wait.
I think that's a perfectly sensible...
This is a very wise virtue.
I just want to say, I do agree with that. I just think there must be a better word than patience to describe it, that's all. Really.
It seems to me the skill that Sarah talks about so well, and I'm sure that's absolutely right, but you acquire a skill to do something. And what I'm trying to get at, does no one know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Does no one know what I'm talking about?
Don't go for the sympathy vote, lad. Just get on with it.
I feel like turning to the audience, like any question. Well, what I say is...
Cut mustard, sir.
Does no one know what I mean when I say when to receive something, to be patient under something that is coming into you is a very difficult thing to do. It's one of the things that critics, for instance, I'm sorry Milton was here, I wasn't here because I wanted to ask him about this, the critics can never do because they're always analysing the experience. And surely one of the things which makes us grown up, and this is where I was going back to your thing, Bob, about children being told to be patient. It's not a thing for children. It's a thing for grown-ups. We put away, if I can bring up some Paul again, childish things when we are patient, when we accept an experience. It's a very
But Stephen, I agree wholly with you. You are not, however, talking about the piddling skill, as Sarah calls it, and I agree it is a skill, of patience. You're talking about being open in the front of experience. Dear me, I don't think it can be so described.
But what is? Let's take another example then, because if you say that leave the post office queue, leave Parsifal, and turn to something like the religious observance, and to ask Roger about this, because as when I was brought up as a Catholic, we had to spend hours and hours and hours on the most repetitive tasks, which I take it were in order to teach us patience. We were given 50 Hail Marys, rosary after rosary, to say. I mean, just this endless repetition to produce, I suppose, as it were, a readiness not to continually go out in search of stimulation. There was
you
the
don't
notion,
think they were just trying to punish you?
No, but there is the moral notion. But there is the moral notion around that people nowadays are more impatient, that the television breeds impatience, that there is so much sensory stimulation around that people generally are impatient and wanting to grab quickly. And so that in childhood it's a good idea to teach people this notion of patience through such things like religious observances.
It's very useful to learn it, otherwise you can't grow up. But a virtue or a moral condition, I suspect it not to be.
I don't think they were making you say your Hail Marys or your rosaries for patience. I think that was just a bit of discipline and to get you into a routine. I mean, I'm totally against it, but I should think that's what they were doing. But you imply that patience is completely inactive. You can be very active while you're being patient, because you are using your mind to think through things, and you can be doing things. I know you can't be doing it if you're in a post office queue, because you daren't leave the spot. But within your own mind, you could be working something out, and this is a marvellous time to use patience.
Well,
I do think it's not a virtue, though. I'm sorry.
Well, I do think it's a virtue. Can I just say that there are conditions under which it can be a virtue, and one of them is where you are in a position of superiority. It is a very positive and real virtue in a teacher of any kind. Somebody who's dealing with somebody who's in a disadvantaged position of some kind, somebody who's dealing with young children, the sick, the old. Patience is a positive and rewarding virtue.
I don't believe that's patience. I think you are describing the outer shores of
Well,
love.
you see, I'm backtracking here now because I take your point about those things I mentioned before having to do with perhaps some larger field. But I was thinking that nannies are very keen on patience, and you're right. They say the child who is manfully chewing on liver and spinach will say, "What's for afters?" and nanny will see wait-and-see pudding, as if that it's actually something good in itself about not knowing and having to wait.
Well, since we've all been displaying the grosser elements and signs and symptoms of impatience, I think now is the time to lower the boom on all that and let's impatiently await this delicious tune. It's called You Are My 2 Days of Summer in the middle of June. You have to be patient to get the title out, because it's quite a long one. But here comes Gary Howard.
The weatherman is sad, stormy clouds are due, with deep depressions to be had. The forecast is so blue. Thunder and lightning can be so frightening, but you can make up for them soon. You are my 2 days of summer in the middle of June. We walk blithely on into the teeming deluge. I wish I'd worn my green Wellingtons instead of my blue suede shoes. But you're brave, and you can save me from a soggy afternoon. You are my 2 days of summer in the middle of June. You came into my life when the temperature was low. I see winds whip through the air and the ground was covered in snow. But through these changeable periods, I knew you'd be the one, with love enough to keep both of us warm. Now the new ice age has come. The rain pours down from a sky so black. I'm leaving on a southbound train and I'm never coming back. But I know you'll change my tune when you walk into my room. You are my 2 days of summer in the middle of June. You are those 2 days of summer in the middle of June.
That was Gary Howard, and I'd like to remind you yet again that he not only does the singing, but he invents, that's to say, imitates all the instruments. And you all look well pleased with the information. Well, you couldn't do it, and I'm jolly sure I couldn't. It's excellent. Now, well, he was singing about the weather. The weather's lousy but interesting, which is why it's always a permissible topic of conversation in this country. And a little book you can browse through while the rain drips off your brolly at the bus stop comes in very handy this week. It tries to work out whether there's anything in those old saws about rain at 7, dry at 11. Pleasant, unaffected little work by a man called Paul Goldsack. But after reading it, meaningless old saws were inventing themselves by the dozen. When peewits fly low, then we shall have snow. A dowly sky means a fly in your eye. If seaweed fries easy, you're eating Chinesey. Well, it's rather like those awful tunes you can't get out of your head. But I say, what a nice innocent book this is. Wholesome, like the weather itself, and the man who wrote it speaks in his own voice. Well, what did you think?
Someone's going to say it very quickly, but it is as though you do want to get revenge on these old saws in the way that they did with that classical one with Red Sky at Night, Shepherd's Delight, Red Sky in the Morning, Shepherd's House on Fire.
Nasty.
Always new to somebody.
But you see, Mr. Goldsack, you will allow, won't you, is also irritated by them.
Yes,
He says about
he is.
awful old twerps in Cornish pubs.
But it is just the fact that he has all those little things, and I think probably all of us, I suspect, know 3 or 4 of these already, and probably are inclined to bring them out. I think that he's likely to turn us into even worse bores than we are at the moment, because not, I think, any of us being particularly country people, that if we go around saying if the sun goes pale to bed, 'twill rain tomorrow, so it is said. There's a lot of twills, by the way, aren't there, in these saws? Is a twill compulsory in a saw, I wonder? Or if the wind shifts against the sun, trust it not, for back 'twill run. Now, the fact is that I'm always likely to get these the wrong way round. It's the trouble with all mnemonics, isn't it? Like I after E, except after C, or whatever, that learning them, you confuse them, and then it makes matters worse, and you could have started off at the very beginning.
But the man finds that many of them are completely without foundation, but he says, and I think he's a good-hearted fellow for saying it, that you'd be poorer if you didn't have these adages, if they weren't passed down, because in a way they meant something, and in the right sort of language.
He slightly upset me at the beginning, though, by doing a Bishop of Durham job and demythologising St Swithin. No,
I missed that.
Oh, St Swithin's gone. I mean, you see, it's hard. The Pope's knocked St Christopher on the head, who must be one of the most popular saints ever going. Now St Swithin's at the wall.
Why is that?
Because this business about, if it rains on St Swithin's Day, July the 15th, it'll then rain for 40 days. Well, he says that's a load of codswallop. And I was sorry to hear that. I mean, I know it's not true, but St Swithin means a lot to me, and it means much to the people of Winchester.
Well, just
you don't
bear
want to be
up.
upset.
Exercise patience. Bear up. That's what I recommend.
I slightly resent all this talk of weather. I'd rather take Dr. Johnson's view if I can just squeeze in before Bob does.
No, please.
Talking of weather is you are talking of that which only a man in a mine or a dungeon can be ignorant. And the thing is that since I live in a dungeon, I'm perfectly prepared to take that on board. But what is so resentful about the current weather we're having, I think, is it imposes itself on you. I don't want to know about the weather. I live in a city. Cities aren't designed for weather at all. You're not supposed to have weather in cities. And I thoroughly resent the cold east wind whistling down the Cromwell Road. And indeed, I'm reduced to Dr. Johnson's other remark about it, which is that the weather this August has not been balmy. You see that I am reduced to talk and even to think about the weather. Pride must have a fall.
Won't you say, you were saying earlier how you had to suffer experiences that cannot be changed, and the wind in the Cromwell Road is one of them,
yes,
Sarah.
Stephen's quite right about the cities. You don't notice the weather in cities. I mean, one of the points that chap with a wonderful name, Mr. Goldsack, makes about forecasts about weather is this magic word local. There will be sort of local showers, and he puts local with a capital L. There's a funny little verse concerned with it. In the part of the world where I live, which is East Anglia, you can actually see the rain falling in one village as you drive out of sunshine in another, because it's very flat and open. There are these huge, lovely skies. And our weather is a thing of shreds and patches, and something our great painters have known how to capitalise on. We should be very grateful. We have weather. We don't have so much a climate as we have weather.
Oh, we're very
You
proud.
go to a Mediterranean
Absolutely.
holiday, you'll sick to death of it, aren't you?
Of course you are, because one day's weather is exactly the same as the next, so much so that you'd think they both came out of the same can. Whereas we're very proud of our weather being perverse, headstrong, willful, that kind of thing. And have you noticed the way people are delighted? By the way, the weather forecasters. What a contradiction. You can forecast a bit of the weather, but you can't do much in the way of forecasting. The way people on buses or in pubs or anywhere you like are always saying, see, they got it wrong again, as though some clever dick had properly got his comeuppance in the face of the chaos of the universe. So our weather is rather special.
We are getting at the weather as well. I mean, I'm very pleased when Stephen says that in towns we shouldn't have to be bothered with the weather at all. I mean, it is something which we shouldn't be brought to our attention in any way. And I always enjoy stories in which the weather is put in its place. There's a story about Sir William Eden, I think it was the father of Anthony Eden, who noticing that the weather had suddenly changed when it was supposed to be good and it was raining, shrieked through the window, just like you, God, and then promptly seizing hold of the barometer, which was still said fair, threw that out of the window, shouting, there, you damned fool, see for yourself.
No. The glass is falling hour by hour. The glass will fall forever. But if you break the bloody glass, you won't hold up the weather. I need not attribute it. You will know who the poet was. Roger.
But the thing I loathe, you see, as a vicar, I get blamed for the weather.
Yes.
They say things like,
right.
why don't you have a word with the governor? The man upstairs, can't you get it right? It's very upsetting. And I remember one village fete that I went to open open once, and it was absolutely pouring with rain, and they were very disgruntled because I hadn't done anything about the weather. And I actually had to open that fete from the gents' lavatory because the recording equipment that was used to make this proclamation, if it got wet, we all got electrocuted. So the only place it could be kept dry was the gents' loo. So at least I was all right with the weather then.
Yes, well, it's not a sinecure in your line of business.
Not at all.
But
people use it as a guilt thing. They say to you, look what weather you've brought.
But
you know, you've gone to stay
well, that's right, they
That's
do.
very
Whether
true.
you're vicar or layman, I mean, I can remember a lady of my acquaintance in one part of the country. We arrived and she said, well, you haven't brought very good weather with. And my wife said, well, I don't think you can blame us. And she simply said, well, I don't know.
It is morally, it's going to be bound up. I mean, on the Queen's birthday, the very fact that the sun comes out in the afternoon is seen as a straightforward moral testimony to the thing. And similarly, if it starts to drizzle through a poor match on Match of the Day, then we know very well that the drizzle, in fact, is a comment upon what's going on. And that's not surprising. I should imagine English novels, more than the novels of any other country, use the weather metaphorically all the way through from Dickens' Fog as a metaphor for the difficulty of human relations in an urban landscape, but also the way in which people every day in their lives, as you say, describe what they enjoy or what they don't enjoy by reference to meteorological sayings. And I was just thinking of the way in which it is the changeability of spring which always induces this concern. And I think it was H.E. Bates who argued once that spring shouldn't be a season. It shouldn't be there because it's not a proper season. It is very much a sport of all the others. And whether it really ever comes into existence at all is dubious. And why we have so much talk now is because spring never happens in a way which satisfies everybody.
No, quite.
I'm sorry.
Right, okay. The weather always seems to be catching up with a date in some peculiar way. At the start of the summer term, I always notice the children wearing duffel coats and Wellingtons, and at the start of the so-called autumn term, you know, they're wearing sundresses. But it's a whole fund of dining out stories that we have because we don't have regular climatic shifts to coincide with the seasons, balmy springs, golden summers, and so on. I mean, if we get a hot week in the middle of July, we get those wonderful headlines, don't we? London sizzled in soaring temperatures, you know, model and actress Cindy Shotover couldn't resist the temptation to strip off at the Serpentine Lido today as office workers cast inhibitions to the winds, and so on.
And men say there's more to come.
That's right, they do, don't
Followed
they?
by a
They
drought.
always do.
Phew, what a scorcher. But I was just going to... this interaction between personality and weather, you know, you're saying, oh, you brought bad weather for you. In those 18th century pictures, are they Gainsborough that have these generals standing on broken pillars and huge stormy skies behind them? But when you say Dickens, there's a wonderful thing in Dickens about when personages get their comeuppance by weather. Lady Dedlock in Bleak House talks of going to her place, and it says in the waters are out in Lincolnshire, a great arch of the park has been sapped and sopped away. The adjacent low-lying ground for half a mile in length is a stagnant river with melancholy trees in it, and a surface punctured all over by falling rain. My Lady Dedlock's place has been extremely dreary.
And
now
this
is a triumph, isn't it?
It is. It's a triumph of quotation too, I may say. It's one of my favourite passages, and you've got it, I think, almost word perfect.
Thank
there.
you.
Good for you. Also, it suggests that possibly one way these adages are really forceful is that we do know the weather has the ascendancy, like the old gods. It is our master. It is our mistress. It will always defeat us. And these adages are almost like placatory utterances to the gods, of the weather.
Yes.
I don't think these songs are always to placate a sort of type of God. I think it's to try and control sometimes. That we say, we know how it happens. We've worked out how it'll happen. Therefore, if it's chaos in the sky, it's chaos on the earth. And this certainly should affect Stephen, because this actually affects cities as well. Because if there's chaos on the sky, you cannot get a taxi.
A suitably light note in which to descend, and I'll add to Laurie's earlier quotation from a nice piece by Max Beerbohm. He calls it Old Surrey, Saws and Sayings, and he says, a red sky at night is a shepherd's delight, a red sky at morning is a shepherd's morning, a sky that looks bad is a shepherd's plaid, a good-looking sky is a shepherd's pie.
Sarah Harrison, the Reverend Roger Royle, Stephen Oliver and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Gary Howard provided the musical interlude and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.